Carl Jung, How to Find Your True Self, The Journey of Individuation. Have you ever experienced that unsettling, persistent feeling that you are somehow living a life that isn't truly, authentically yours, as if on some fundamental level you are merely following a pre-written script, meticulously crafted not by your own hand, but by the often invisible yet powerful influences of others? Parents, teachers, friends, society at large. And deep down, perhaps in moments of quiet solitude, something primal within you begins to scream. A silent yet insistent protest that something is fundamentally wrong with this picture. You wake up each morning, perhaps slipping into the familiar, comfortable armor of the same mask you wear day after day. You diligently fulfill your obligations, navigate social interactions, engage with people as if everything is perfectly fine, seamlessly playing the expected roles. But then, inevitably, at some point, perhaps late at night or during a quiet commute, when the external noise finally subsides and silence arrives, that profoundly uncomfortable, often terrifying question inevitably surfaces. Who am I really? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, believed that this pervasive feeling of disconnection, this sense of living an inauthentic existence, is not a mere coincidence or a personal failing. On the contrary, he saw it as a critical symptom of a deep, widespread psychological problem, a fundamental challenge that almost no one possesses the raw courage to truly confront. The stark reality, Jung argued, is that most people navigate their entire lives without ever genuinely knowing their true selves. They unconsciously limit themselves, confining their existence to playing predefined social roles, embodying manufactured identities based on external expectations, and adhering to imposed values that may not resonate with their core being. And perhaps the most tragic aspect of this widespread phenomenon, many come to believe that this superficial layer, this constructed persona, is all there is. They live and eventually die without ever having truly encountered, embraced, or expressed the profound depths of their own unique soul. And now, inevitably comes the most crucial, most personal question of all. Is this potentially happening to you? Is the self you present to the world, the identity you cling to, truly you? Your carefully cultivated personality, your stated desires, your deeply held beliefs? How much of this intricate tapestry is genuinely, authentically yours, woven from the threads of your own experience and inner knowing, and how much, upon closer, more honest examination, was subtly placed there, instilled, conditioned into you by others, starting from your earliest, most impressionable years? Since childhood, we are all subjected to powerful forces of social conditioning. We learn often implicitly that we need to fit in to become acceptable according to the prevailing norms of our family culture and society. We instinctively learn to hide certain aspects of ourselves, perhaps our vulnerabilities, our unconventional thoughts, our unacceptable emotions, in order to secure the fundamental human need to be loved, accepted, and validated. In this process, we unconsciously begin to craft a mask, or as Jung termed it, a persona, a social disguise, a carefully constructed facade that we use primarily to protect ourselves from judgment, rejection, and the perceived dangers of revealing our true, often more complex and vulnerable selves. But the more consistently and convincingly we wear this mask, the further, often imperceptibly, we drift away from our true selves, from the authentic core of our being. And eventually, for many a day arrives when this meticulously maintained mask becomes tragically all that is left, a hollow shell concealing a forgotten or undeveloped inner reality. However, Jung issued a stark warning: living perpetually disconnected from who we really are solely through the persona inevitably comes at a significant psychological cost, a cost typically paid with pervasive feelings of anguish, chronic dissatisfaction, and a persistent gnawing sense that something essential is missing from our lives, even amidst external success or apparent contentment. Have you ever experienced that perplexing feeling that no matter what external goals you achieve, No matter how much validation you receive, there remains a persistent underlying emptiness, a sense that something vital, something truly meaningful, is always just beyond your grasp. This occurs, Jung argued, precisely because what your soul truly needs is not fundamentally out there. It cannot be found solely in achieving a better job title, securing a seemingly perfect relationship, or basking in the fleeting recognition of others. The missing piece, the source of true fulfillment, lies within you, buried deep beneath layers upon layers of accumulated social conditioning, repressed emotions, and forgotten aspects of your authentic self. The big life-altering question, therefore, becomes this: are you genuinely willing to embark on the often challenging, sometimes frightening, yet ultimately liberating journey of diving deep into your own psyche to discover who you really are beneath the masks and conditioning? Because make no mistake, this inner journey is not easy. Finding the true self requires you to courageously confront everything within yourself that has been systematically repressed, conveniently forgotten, or unconsciously distorted over the course of your life. It demands that you turn your gaze inward and unflinchingly face the parts of yourself, the insecurities, the fears, the unacceptable desires, the hidden potentials that you might understandably prefer to avoid. But crucially, this inward journey, this confrontation with the totality of your being, is also the only path that leads to genuine, lasting freedom. In this exploration, we will delve into the profound journey that Carl Jung called individuation, the intricate, lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole, of consciously integrating all the disparate parts of yourself, the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, and finally, courageously living in accordance with your true essence. Are you ready to begin this transformative quest? Then let us proceed. Since your earliest years, you learned, often implicitly, that securing acceptance, belonging, even love, required you to behave in certain prescribed ways. Perhaps you were meticulously taught the importance of being perpetually polite, never speaking too loudly, diligently, suppressing any overt displays of anger, and consistently prioritizing the needs and feelings of others above your own. Or maybe conversely, you absorbed the message that you had to be relentlessly strong at all times, skillfully hiding any perceived weaknesses, projecting an unwavering facade of confidence, even when internally you were riddled with self-doubt. Unbeknownst to your developing conscious mind, you began the intricate process of shaping an identity that wasn't solely authentically yours. Instead, it became largely a reflection of what the external world, your family, your peers, your culture, seemed to expect and demand of you. Carl Jung gave this constructed social mask a specific name: the persona. It represents the carefully curated face you present to the world, the specific version of yourself that you have consciously or unconsciously constructed primarily to fit in and navigate social interactions smoothly. And let's be clear, don't be fooled into thinking this is something only inauthentic people do. We all possess and utilize a persona to varying degrees. If you have ever acted slightly differently when at work compared to when you are at home, or when interacting with close friends versus casual acquaintances, or even curated a specific image on social media, then you have directly experienced the pervasive power and function of the persona in your own life. Is the persona inherently useful? Yes, undoubtedly. Without some degree of social adaptation, navigating the complexities of human relationships and societal structures would be virtually impossible. However, therein lies the great danger. When you begin to completely identify with this mask, when the role you play becomes indistinguishable from your perceived sense of self, you inevitably start to forget who you really are beneath the surface. Pause for a moment and engage in honest self-reflection. How many times have you said or done something not out of genuine conviction, but primarily just to be accepted or avoid disapproval? How many times have you deliberately hidden what you truly thought or felt, out of a pervasive fear of judgment or rejection? How many times have you caught yourself forcing a smile, nodding agreeably, when internally you felt like screaming in frustration or disagreement? This pervasive disconnect happens precisely because, at some often unidentified point in our development, the persona ceases to be merely a flexible tool for social interaction and begins to dominate our entire existence. We are no longer operating as authentic individuals, expressing ourselves genuinely. We become instead characters meticulously playing a role, often a role we didn't even consciously choose, but rather passively inherited or adopted out of perceived necessity. And herein lies the fundamental problem. The persona, by its very nature, cannot sustain your soul. It can potentially bring you external acceptance, social validation, even superficial admiration, but it can never provide deep, lasting fulfillment. It might guarantee fleeting compliments, but it cannot deliver genuine, enduring happiness. In the long run, living solely through the persona, disconnected from the deeper currents of your true self, inevitably leads to an empty life, a pervasive sense that something essential, something vital is profoundly missing, even if you struggle to articulate precisely what it is. And worse still, the more desperately you cling to this familiar mask for security, the further and more irretrievably you drift away from your own true essence. But if the persona, this social mask, is not your true self, then the crucial question remains: who are you really? To begin answering this profound question, we must have the courage to look at the other side of the coin, to explore the parts of ourselves that have been systematically repressed, denied, and pushed into the hidden recesses of the unconscious. Jung gave this repository of our disowned selves a specific name: the shadow. And it is precisely here, in the often uncomfortable exploration of our own shadow, that the true quest for discovering your authentic self genuinely begins. But be forewarned, what lies hidden within the shadow is not always easy or pleasant to confront. Are you ready to discover what resides there? Then continue with me. If the persona represents the polished mask you consciously wear to gain social acceptance, then the shadow embodies everything you unconsciously hide from yourself as much as from others, precisely to avoid the pain of rejection, judgment, or social disapproval. But here lies the crucial psychological insight. What you actively repress does not simply disappear. On the contrary, denied conscious expression, these disowned aspects of yourself often gain a potent autonomous strength within the depths of your unconscious. They operate silently, powerfully in the shadows of your mind, insidiously influencing your emotions, fueling your irrational fears, shaping your compulsive behaviors, and even subtly dictating the choices you make in life, all often entirely without your conscious realization. Carl Jung described the shadow as the hidden, often darker side of the psyche, composed primarily of everything that has been systematically repressed throughout your life. This includes socially prohibited desires, impulses deemed unacceptable, contained simmering anger that was never allowed healthy expression, perceived weaknesses you desperately don't want to admit even to yourself, unresolved traumas you have actively tried to forget or minimize, and even positive potentials you were discouraged from developing. And here's a critical point often misunderstood. Many of the aspects relegated to your shadow are not inherently bad or evil. They are simply parts of your authentic, complex human nature that at some point in your life someone, perhaps a parent, a teacher, a peer group, or society at large, explicitly or implicitly communicated were unacceptable, undesirable, or unsafe to express. Consider these common examples. Perhaps as a child you exhibited boundless curiosity, constantly asking questions, but were repeatedly told you were being inconvenient or nosy, and consequently learned to suppress your natural inquisitiveness and stay quiet. Maybe you felt the natural, healthy urge to express anger in response to injustice or boundary violations, but were taught that anger was wrong or unladylike, unmanly, leading you to habitually swallow your frustrations until they eventually erupt in disproportionate or destructive ways. Perhaps you naturally display deep sensitivity and empathy, but society convinced you that such traits were signs of weakness, prompting you to learn to hide your authentic feelings behind a mask of stoicism or indifference. All of this, all the parts of your authentic self that were denied, shamed, or discouraged, did not simply vanish. They merely retreated, went into hiding within the vast landscape of your shadow, patiently waiting for moments of weakness, stress, or lowered conscious control to emerge, often in distorted or unexpected ways. And emerge they most certainly do. If you have ever experienced a sudden, inexplicable outburst of anger, totally disproportionate to the situation, followed by intense regret. If you have ever felt a potent surge of envy towards someone's success or happiness, and then immediately tried to deny or rationalize that feeling to yourself. Or if you have ever reacted excessively and defensively to seemingly mild criticism without fully understanding the intensity of your own response, then you have directly experienced your shadow taking temporary control of your conscious personality. When we fail to consciously acknowledge and integrate our shadow aspects, they inevitably manifest in these distorted, often destructive ways, subtly sabotaging our relationships through projection and unconscious conflict, hindering our careers through self-limiting beliefs or fear of success, and consistently undermining our self-esteem with persistent feelings of inadequacy or guilt. But here is the crucial, often liberating truth that conventional wisdom rarely tells you. Your shadow is not fundamentally your enemy. On the contrary, hidden within its depths, often lie many of the most valuable and potent aspects of your true personality, your untapped creativity, your raw authenticity, your fierce passion, your undeveloped strengths, your unique potential. You simply cannot become psychologically whole, Jung argued, until you consciously undertake the challenging yet necessary work of integrating this disowned part of yourself back into your conscious awareness. And to achieve that integration, you must first stop running away from what scares you within, and instead summon the courage to begin patiently, compassionately looking inward. But how practically does one begin to face something that has been actively repressed, often for decades? How do you bring the contents of your shadow into the light of conscious awareness without letting its potentially overwhelming energy consume you? The answer lies in understanding and connecting with another central concept in Jungian psychology, the self, often referred to as the true self. And that pivotal concept is precisely what we are going to explore now. If the persona represents the outward-facing mask we present to the world, and the shadow encompasses everything we have repressed and hidden within our unconscious, then the self, often capitalized in Jungian terms to denote its significance, or the true self, represents that which exists beyond and encompasses both these layers. It is the totality of your psyche, the harmonious, integrated fusion between who you authentically are in your depths and who you consciously choose to show to the world. It is the central organizing principle of the psyche, the innate archetype of wholeness. Jung believed profoundly that the ultimate purpose of human life was not merely to blindly follow a path predefined by societal expectations or external authorities, but rather to embark on the lifelong journey of becoming psychologically whole, to courageously discover your true essence, that unique spark within you, and then strive to live in accordance with it authentically and courageously. This intricate, often challenging, yet ultimately deeply rewarding process of self-discovery, integration, and authentic living is precisely what he termed individuation. However, finding and connecting with the self is not something that occurs passively or by mere chance. It is not a sudden magical epiphany that simply appears one day fully formed, presenting itself before you. The self Jung suggested does not reveal itself readily to those who are unwilling to confront the often uncomfortable truth about themselves, who cling rigidly to their masks, or who remain terrified of exploring their own inner shadows. You need to actively seek it out. And this quest, this inner pilgrimage, requires a deep, committed, often arduous journey within yourself. It necessitates a direct confrontation with everything you have been subtly or overtly taught to hide, deny, or repress. It demands a conscious effort towards reconciliation between your most authentic, often deeply buried desires and the various restrictions, limitations, and expectations imposed upon you by the external world. Perhaps the single greatest obstacle encountered on the path to finding the true self is fear, the pervasive fear of losing the familiar, albeit potentially limiting identity you have painstakingly constructed over the years. The unsettling fear of realizing that many of your most significant life choices may not have been truly, authentically yours, but rather driven by unconscious conditioning or external pressures. The deep-seated fear of confronting aspects of your own personality, your anger, your envy, your insecurities, your perceived flaws that you have diligently denied or repressed for so long. This multifaceted fear is precisely why so many people tragically never truly find or connect with their deeper self. They spend their entire lives clinging desperately to the perceived safety of the persona, perpetually pretending to be someone they are not, all while their unacknowledged shadow operates powerfully behind the scenes, subtly sabotaging their relationships, hindering their potential, and ultimately preventing their chances of experiencing genuine, lasting happiness and fulfillment. But when you consciously begin the courageous work of integrating your shadow, acknowledging, understanding, and accepting those previously disowned parts of yourself, and simultaneously start to question the rigid identification with the masks you wear, something truly incredible begins to happen. You start to experience a profound kind of freedom you may have never known before. You gradually discover that you no longer need to constantly pretend to be someone you are not, simply to gain acceptance. You begin to realize that you no longer need to desperately please everyone around you, sacrificing your own needs in the process. You start to act more authentically, making decisions that genuinely resonate with your inner compass, rather than solely striving to meet the often conflicting expectations of others. And perhaps the most interesting, often unexpected part of this journey, the closer you get to connecting with your true self, the more life itself begins to make a deeper, more coherent sense. The anxieties and frustrations that once seemed inexplicable, overwhelming, or random start to reveal their clear roots in your own unconscious patterns and unresolved issues. You begin to understand why certain self-defeating patterns keep repeating in your life. You gain insight into why certain situations or types of people affect you so intensely. You finally comprehend why certain past relationships never truly worked out or felt fulfilling. You start to recognize that perhaps throughout your entire life, there was always something deep inside you, an inner wisdom subtly trying to show you the way, trying to guide you towards greater authenticity. But you were simply too busy, too distracted, too afraid, too invested in trying to fit in to truly listen. However, there is an important, often overlooked detail in this intricate process. The path towards finding and embodying the self cannot be walked entirely in isolation, solely through introspection. There is a fundamental element in this journey that many ignore, often to their detriment: the profound influence of the collective unconscious and the powerful archetypes that reside within it, shaping the very ways we think, feel, perceive the world, and behave, often entirely outside our conscious awareness. If you do not develop some understanding of these deep, hidden forces operating within your psyche, you will likely never be able to fully comprehend the totality of who you are. And that is precisely what we must explore next. The human mind, as Jung conceptualized it, is far more vast and complex than just the surface layer of what we consciously see. Understand and control the vast majority of our psyche remains hidden, operating at a deep, often invisible, unconscious level, yet exerting a profound influence on our conscious lives. Jung firmly believed that to truly embark on the journey of finding the authentic self, it is not enough to merely analyze our rational thoughts, examine our conscious beliefs, or track our daily decisions. We must possess the courage to dive deep into the often murky waters of the unconscious, for it is precisely there, within those hidden depths, that the fundamental, often invisible patterns that shape our identity, our motivations, and our ultimate destiny are to be found. But what exactly resides within this vast expanse of the unconscious, beyond the personal shadow containing our repressed experiences and unrecognized desires? Jung proposed the existence of something even more fundamental, more universal: archetypes. Through his extensive research into mythology, religion, dreams, and the symptoms of his patients, Jung discovered compelling evidence that the human psyche is not born as a completely blank slate, tabula rasa. On the contrary, he argued that we are all born inheriting certain universal, innate mental structures, fundamental patterns of thought, typical modes of behavior, and recurring emotional responses that are shared in their basic form by all human beings, regardless of their specific culture, historical period, or individual life experiences. He termed this shared inherited foundation the collective unconscious, and it is from this deep transpersonal layer of the psyche that archetypes emerge. Archetypes can be understood as primordial images, universal symbols, or fundamental patterns of instinctual behavior embedded within the collective unconscious. They profoundly influence the way we perceive the world, interpret our experiences, and unconsciously shape our sense of self. If you have ever felt an inexplicable, powerful attraction to certain types of stories, timeless myths, or universal symbols like the hero's journey, the wise old man or woman, the great mother, it is likely because these narratives and images resonate deeply with the archetypes operating actively within your own psyche. They appear ubiquitously in fairy tales, epic poems, blockbuster movies, religious traditions, and perhaps most importantly and personally in the symbolic language of your own dreams, and often in your unconscious behaviors and relationship patterns. For example, the hero is a universally recognized archetype present in virtually all cultures throughout history. It represents the innate human impulse towards facing challenges, overcoming obstacles, striving for growth, and embarking on transformative journeys. But alongside the hero, there exists the archetype of the wise old man woman sage, symbolizing knowledge, introspection, wisdom, and guidance. There is also the rebel outlaw who embodies the drive to challenge established rules, question authority, and disrupt the status quo, and the caregiver nurturer representing the powerful instinct to protect, serve, and care for others. These are just a few examples of countless archetypes. Jung identified others include the mother, father, child, trickster, shadow, anima, animus, self. And here's the crucial, often unsettling part. You do not consciously choose which archetypes most powerfully influence your life. They operate largely within you without your direct awareness, shaping your perceptions, motivations, and reactions in profound ways. The problem arises, Jung warned, when you unconsciously over-identify with only one or a few specific archetypes while simultaneously neglecting or repressing the others. For instance, if you exclusively see yourself through the lens of the hero archetype, you might constantly feel immense pressure to always be strong, successful, and in control, finding it incredibly difficult to accept your own weaknesses, vulnerabilities, or moments of failure. Conversely, if you live solely identified with the role of the caregiver, you may spend your entire life habitually putting the needs and desires of others far above your own, ultimately neglecting your own well-being and potentially fostering resentment. Finding the true self, therefore, involves the complex yet essential task of balancing these archetypal forces within your own psyche. It requires consciously recognizing which archetypes tend to dominate your conscious life and personality, and then actively working to integrate those archetypes that have been previously neglected, repressed, or pushed into the shadow. But how do these powerful, often invisible archetypes actually manifest in your everyday life? The answer, Jung suggested, lies primarily in paying close attention to the symbolic language of your dreams, noticing your recurring impulses and compulsions, observing the persistent patterns that repeat themselves in your relationships and life choices, often without you fully understanding why. And if you consistently ignore these subtle yet significant messages from the unconscious, you are effectively ignoring essential parts of yourself, vital aspects of your potential wholeness. This unconscious influence of archetypes is precisely why so many people feel perpetually lost, confused, or adrift in their lives. They fail to understand that there are powerful, invisible forces operating beneath the surface of their conscious awareness, subtly shaping their deepest desires, influencing their most significant decisions, and even contributing to their recurring existential crises or feelings of dissatisfaction. But here lies the most critical question regarding archetypes and the journey towards the self. If you remain unaware of these powerful archetypal forces operating within you, they effectively control you from the shadows. They unconsciously determine your behaviors, fuel your insecurities, shape your relationship dynamics, and often dictate the course of your life, leading you to repeat patterns you might consciously wish to break. However, if you cultivate the courage and self-awareness to recognize and consciously integrate these archetypal energies, acknowledging both their light and shadow aspects within yourself, you begin to take conscious control of your own narrative. You move from being unconsciously driven to consciously choosing. And that conscious integration, that reclaiming of psychic territory, is precisely what differentiates those individuals who successfully find and embody their true self from those who spend their entire lives tragically trapped within the confines of automatic, unconscious patterns. But what if someone actively chooses to ignore all of this? What happens psychologically to an individual who steadfastly refuses to look at their unconscious, who resists the call towards individuation, and who continues to live their life solely according to the dictates of limiting masks and comfortable illusions? The answer lies in the pervasive, often insidious forms of psychological suffering that inevitably accompany those who persistently flee from themselves. And that inherent danger of non-individuation is precisely what we must now explore. What becomes of the individual who spends their entire life perpetually running away from themselves, who consistently ignores the subtle yet insistent whispers of their own shadow, who lives perpetually imprisoned within the rigid confines of a socially acceptable persona, and who steadfastly refuses to acknowledge the powerful archetypes secretly shaping their destiny from the depths of the unconscious. Carl Jung was unequivocally clear about the consequences. Avoiding the challenging yet vital process of individuation does not ultimately keep us safe. Instead, it condemns us to live a fundamentally fragmented existence, an inner life often filled with pervasive anxiety, chronic frustration, and a deep, gnawing emptiness that can never truly be filled or permanently satiated by anything external. Not by material possessions, not by fleeting relationships, not by social status or worldly achievements. Many people operate under the comforting but ultimately misguided belief that simply following society's established rules, diligently fitting into the expected roles, and conforming to external expectations will somehow guarantee a peaceful, untroubled life. But this perceived tranquility is often merely superficial, a fragile facade masking underlying discontent. Inevitably, at some point, for those living inauthentically, something begins to go wrong internally. This inner dissonance, this cry from the neglected self, may manifest initially as recurring emotional crises, with no readily apparent external explanation. It might surface as persistent feelings of deep dissatisfaction or meaninglessness, even when objectively speaking, everything in their external life seems perfect or successful. Or perhaps more insidiously, it can emerge through the development of psychosomatic illnesses, where repressed emotional pain finds expression through physical symptoms. The body and mind, Jung believed, possess an innate wisdom and will always find ways, however indirect or painful, to alert us when we are straying too far from our true nature, from the path towards wholeness. Non-individuation can also manifest powerfully through recurring destructive patterns in our lives. Have you ever observed how some individuals seem condemned to repeat the same fundamental mistakes throughout their lives, seemingly unable to learn from past experiences? How they repeatedly find themselves entangled in unhealthy or abusive relationships that mirror unresolved childhood dynamics. How they consistently sabotage their own achievements, just as success seems within reach. Or how they exist in a constant low-grade state of pervasive dissatisfaction, seemingly incapable of finding genuine joy or contentment. This often happens precisely because when we fail to consciously confront and integrate what lies hidden within our unconscious, our shadows, our complexes, our unacknowledged needs, we inevitably become prisoners of our own internal landscape. The unconscious, denied direct expression, finds alternative, often destructive ways to express itself, even if that expression manifests primarily through suffering and self-defeat. Another common symptom of non-individuation is the pervasive feeling that we are merely existing, going through the motions, but not truly vibrantly living. This often manifests as a life lived in a monotonous routine devoid of passion or purpose, characterized by a sense that we are simply drifting along, going with the flow, without any clear inner direction or sense of personal agency. This, tragically, is the lived reality for millions of people who have never paused long enough to genuinely question whether the life they are currently leading is truly the life they consciously chose, or simply the life they passively fell into. They obediently follow inherited patterns, adhere to imposed beliefs, and strive to meet external expectations without ever stopping to ask the fundamental life-altering question, does this truly make me happy? Does this align with who I authentically am? And perhaps the most dangerous, most corrosive consequence of all is the accumulation of deep-seated resentment. When a person consistently ignores or suppresses who they really are at their core, they inevitably begin to feel a simmering, often unconscious anger. But because the true source of this anger, the betrayal of their own self, remains unrecognized, they often misdirect it. They may turn this anger outward, habitually blaming the world, the system, their family, or society at large for their pervasive suffering and dissatisfaction. Or perhaps even more destructively, they may turn this anger inward, transforming it into chronic depression, persistent patterns of self-sabotage, and a profound, isolating disconnection from their own inner life force, their own inherent potential for joy and meaning. But crucially, even amidst this potentially bleak picture, there is always a way out. There exists a pathway to break free from this cycle of suffering and liberate oneself from this invisible, self-imposed prison. The answer lies not in further denial or distraction, but in summoning the profound courage to face the truth about oneself. The courage to rigorously question one's own cherished illusions and limiting beliefs, and the unwavering commitment to actively seek individuation, the journey towards wholeness. This process, let us reiterate, is not easy. It demands significant inner strength, unwavering determination, and the fundamental willingness to look within, even, perhaps especially, when what we find there is uncomfortable, unpleasant, or challenges our previous self-image. And now we arrive at the crucial culminating point. What does it truly mean in practical lived experience to be yourself authentically? What does a life lived without masks, without crippling repression, without the constant fear of external judgment, actually look and feel like? What genuinely happens when you finally courageously find and begin to embody your true self? Let's explore the profound implications of this arrival in our conclusion. Finding your true self, embarking on the path of individuation, is ultimately not a destination to be definitively reached, but rather an ongoing dynamic process. It is not something that happens overnight like flipping a switch, where one day you simply wake up with perfect clarity, knowing exactly who you are in all your multifaceted complexity. It is instead a lifelong journey, a continuous path marked by profound discoveries necessary, deconstructions of old identities and beliefs, and courageous reconstructions based on newfound awareness and authentic values. It involves the ongoing work of consciously facing the shadows within and progressively freeing yourself from the limiting masks that have been imposed upon you by conditioning or that you yourself adopted out of fear. And it is undeniably a path that few consciously choose to walk with sustained commitment. Most people understandably perhaps prefer the perceived safety of conformity. They cling tightly to their familiar personas because they harbor the deep-seated belief that without these masks, they would inevitably face rejection, isolation, or social annihilation. They actively avoid looking at their shadows because they are genuinely terrified of what uncomfortable truths, what hidden darkness they might find lurking there. They remain blissfully ignorant of the archetypes that silently guide their lives, because acknowledging these powerful unconscious forces would shatter the comforting illusion that they are fully in rational control of their own destiny. But this pervasive fear, this avoidance of the inner journey, inevitably comes at a steep cost, an empty existence fundamentally lacking in genuine authenticity, profound depth, and the potential for real, lasting meaning. Jung, through his life's work, powerfully showed us that true psychological freedom lies not in seamlessly fitting in conforming to the expectations of the herd, but rather in courageously becoming who we really uniquely are. This profound transformation necessitates accepting your wholeness, embracing both your perceived positive qualities and your undeniable flaws, integrating both your conscious light and your unconscious darkness. It means consciously taking control of your own life's narrative, refusing to be merely a passive product of your environment, your culture, or the often unreasonable expectations of others. It involves decisively abandoning the role of the puppet forever, reacting to external strings, and instead stepping fully into the role of the conscious author of your own story. But let us be unequivocally clear one final time. This path demands immense courage. The courage to let go of the cherished illusions that, while perhaps comfortable, have ultimately limited your growth and kept you small for far too long. The courage to directly face your own deepest fears and most persistent insecurities without immediately resorting to defense mechanisms or distractions. The courage to accept the potentially unsettling realization that you may not be the person you always thought you were, the person society told you to be. And that's okay, because precisely in that acceptance lies the incredible opportunity to finally become someone much greater, someone infinitely more authentic, someone vibrantly, undeniably alive. So I ask you now, as we conclude this shared exploration, are you genuinely ready for this profound challenge? Are you truly willing to rigorously question the often limiting stories you've been told and told yourself about who you are? Are you prepared to courageously confront the parts of yourself that have long been relegated to the shadows, denied, and repressed? Are you ready finally to begin the lifelong journey of living in accordance with your true essence? If something within this video, within these challenging yet potentially liberating ideas has resonated with you, has sparked a flicker of recognition or a surge of resolve, I invite you now to let me know in the comments what specific part impacted you the most. Have you ever personally felt the profound dissonance of living an identity that didn't feel truly yours? Let's continue this vital conversation. And crucially, don't stop here. The next video is an essential continuation designed to deepen this journey of self-discovery and help you understand even more about the hidden mechanisms that shape your mind and your reality. So keep watching, keep exploring, keep questioning, because this profound discovery, the discovery of your true self, is truly just beginning.